to make a few points this week and next week, I think, which are really basic, very basic to the understanding of Rosh Hashanah. All holidays from the Jewish calendar, except for Rosh Hashanah, commemorate events in Jewish history. Pesach commemorates the Yetzias Mitzrayim, Shavuos, the giving of the Torah, Sukkot, the fact that as we traveled in the desert, we were enveloped by the clouds of glory. The rabbinic holidays, Chanukah and Purim, as well, commemorate events in Jewish history. Rosh Hashanah commemorates something which is part of world history, the creation of the world. And it is the day of judgment not only for Jews, but for all mankind. So the question is, why is it a Jewish holiday? Why do only Jews celebrate Rosh Hashanah? Now, this question presupposes something which perhaps itself would be a worthy subject for a talk, which is the Torah is not just the law for the Jewish people. The Torah is the law for all mankind. Just as within the Jewish people there are differences between Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim, non-Jews are also a legal category within the Torah's scope. They have Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. They have mitzvahs which are the so-called universal mitzvahs, and Jews have extra Jewish mitzvahs. Rosh Hashanah should be a general mitzvah, because since it's Rosh Hashanah for everybody, commemorates the creation of the world, which of course is significant for all mankind, and it's the Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment, for everybody. So why don't the Jews celebrate it? And to be honest, this is a thought which comes to my mind all the time. Every year, when I walk to shul on Rosh Hashanah morning, and usually it's a weekday, so people are up and about doing their thing, and it just dawns on me, you know, they are clueless. They have no idea what's going on. And at this very moment, they are being judged. And look at them, they're totally oblivious, they're walking around doing whatever they're doing. Someone should tell them. Maybe they would respond in an appropriate way. But the Torah doesn't obligate them. It's very much a Jewish holiday, so how do we understand that? Another question we have to ask is that if Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment, it hardly seems that our way of observing it is appropriate. Rosh Hashanah is the Yom Tov. There are many paiskim that hold that there is a mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov on Rosh Hashanah. Just like the other Yom Tovim, there's a mitzvah to rejoice and to celebrate. Many paiskim hold that on Rosh Hashanah there's also a mitzvah to rejoice and celebrate. It would seem to me that if we're talking about the Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment, this is not a day for celebration. This would be a day for worry, a day for distress, a day for pacing the floor, etc. And the tour in the beginning of Hilchos Rosh Hashanah brings a medrash, which in fact points to the sound that the Jewish people are a very unusual nation, because generally in the world, the outside world, when a person is about to face the judge, he's on trial, he doesn't shave, and he lets himself go, and he wears black clothes, and he's in a state of distress. And the Jewish people bathe, and they wear white clothes. And of course, white clothes is a sign of festivity. Culturally, at the time, white clothes was a sign of celebration. And we eat and we drink, and we are confident that all will be well.
Doesn't white have a dual meaning?
There's dual meaning, but the Medrash holds that the idea of Levanim is a sign of celebration, that particular Medrash. And it seems very odd that we should celebrate Rosh Hashanah. Now, Rosh Hashanah has many names. One of the names is Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment. And this is familiar to us from one of the piyutim, which we say, L'keil orech din. And in that piyut, Rosh Hashanah is referred to as Yom Hadin quite a number of times. Bochein Levavos B'Yom Din, and so on and so forth. That's one name. But the name we use in the Shemona Esrei is Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. Many people believe, I think also mistakenly, that these two names are synonymous. The Day of Remembrance really means this is the day that God remembers all our actions, and accordingly we are judged. So many people use these two terms, Yom HaDin and Yom HaZikaron, interchangeably. From the Ramban in Chumash, we see not that way. The Ramban clearly understands that the concept of din and the concept of zikaron are two different concepts. What does the Ramban say? This is the Ramban in Parshas Emor. In Parshas Emor, the Torah tells us a little bit of a hint about the meaning of Rosh Hashanah. By the way, the fact that Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment is not explicit in the Torah. It's not written anywhere in the Chumash that on Rosh Hashanah we are judged.
How do we know it then?
How do we know it? So if you look in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah learns it from a verse in Tehillim. That it says in Tehillim, Chiklu b'chayda shayfar, blow on the first day of the month, the shayfar, and of course it refers to the month of Tishrei. Ki chok li Yisrael hu, for it is a judgment day for Israel, Mishpat Lokei Yaakov, a judgment for the God of Yaakov. So it says there's a judgment day, therefore we blow the shofar. And from that, Chazal derive that judgment day takes place on the day the shofar is blown. But it's only a hint in the Pasuk in Tehillim. There's nothing explicit in the Chumash that says we're judged on Rosh Hashanah. That's noteworthy. So what does the Torah tell us about Rosh Hashanah? It says that Rosh Hashanah is a day of Zichron Trua. It is a day of remembrance, which is aroused by the sounding of the shofar. But the sounding of the shofar arouses remembrance. Now, we need to understand what this concept of remembrance is. How does the shofar arouse it? But let's start with the Ramban's words. The Ramban says that the Torah tells us that on Rosh Hashanah there is a zichron trua, there is a remembrance which is aroused by the shofar, but the Torah never tells us why we need this remembrance. Why do we have to have a remembrance on this day? So the Ramban says, but I'll offer a conjecture. Inasmuch as this holiday is the first day of the month in which Yom Kippur falls, we understand ourselves that it must be the day of judgment. Now this Ramban itself is a mouthful. Ramban says, how do I know that on the first day of Tishrei there is a judgment? Because since 10 days later we have Yom Kippur, the day of forgiveness. So of course, what must the significance of the holiday that comes 10 days before be? It must be the day of judgment. And at first glance it's hard to understand, because everyone always asks the question the other way. That wouldn't it be beautiful if Yom Kippur would come first and then we have judgment? It makes more sense. Because this way we'd be forgiven first and then we'd be judged with a clean slate. This way it's really inefficient. First we're judged in Rosh Hashanah and then we have a day of atonement, a day of forgiveness. And therefore as a result the judgment of Rosh Hashanah has to be tentative because it can be changed on Yom Kippur. So therefore there's only a ksiva, not a chasima. There's an inscription but not a seal. And for 10 days it's in limbo. And then depending on what happens in Yom Kippur, we'll see whether there's an adjustment or not. So that's not a very efficient way of doing things. So we always think, it would make a lot of sense, that Rosh Hashanah should come after Yom Kippur. And we attempt to answer this in various ways. But usually whenever you try to answer a question, you have to acknowledge that the question is better than the answer. The answer is usually inadequate. But the Ramban is telling us something else. The Ramban is telling us not only does it make sense that Rosh Hashanah falls before Yom Kippur, but in fact, it is so pashut, it is so obvious that there has to be a day of judgment before the day of forgiveness, that even though I don't really know what the significance of Rosh Hashanah is, I say, oh, if 10 days later the day of forgiveness, it must be today's the day of judgment. why is that so pashut? Now, this is not what I wanted to talk about, but I think that it's worth pointing out. The Ramban is telling us a very, very deep insight, which is this, which is real forgiveness cannot be given unless there's a judgment. In other words, if you come over to me and say, you know, in case I might have done something to you over the last 10 years, since we've known each other, and I'm asking your forgiveness, and I say, you know, I can't really remember anything you did, but I forgive you. There's really no forgiveness at all. You don't know what you're asking forgiveness for. I don't know what I'm extending forgiveness for. So where's the forgiveness? But real forgiveness means you have to assess the damage that was done. And then, in full cognition of that damage, if I extend forgiveness, that's a real forgiveness. The Ramban understands there has to be a Yom Hadin before Rosh Hashanah, before Yom Kippur. If Yom Kippur is their forgiveness, that means that God has assessed what we've done. It's fully arrayed before Him, and nevertheless He extends His forgiveness. That's a real forgiveness.
We don't translate Yom Kippur as a day of forgiveness, do we?
Day of atonement. Atonement
Right.
is cleansing, it's forgiveness. It includes all those
No,
ideas.
atonement is what we do. Forgiveness is what God does.
No. Kapara is what God does. We do tshuva,
Right.
but kapara is what God extends. Yom Kippur is the day of kapara, Yom Kippur. It's the day of cleansing, the day of atonement, right? But there can't be that forgiveness and cleansing unless there is an assessment of exactly what needs to be cleansed. And therefore the Ramban says it's pashut. It's axiomatic. There has to be a day of judgment before Yom Kippur. You think about it. It makes perfect sense. So therefore the Ramban says that's how I know that there's a din on Rosh Hashanah. And therefore says the Ramban, since, now that we've established that, since I know that there's a judgment on Rosh Hashanah, now I understand why I need the zikaron, why I need the remembrance. I need the remembrance so that we should be victorious in our din. So it's clear from the Ramban that the zikaron is not the same thing as the din. The zikaron is what I need to be able to win my case. To win my case, I need to have the zikaron. So the zikaron, which is aroused by the sound of the shofar, facilitates my winning my case. So what does it all mean? So it means like this. The idea of zikaron, the idea of remembrance, is not just recalling information. The zikaron is reliving an experience. And there are certain things that we can do that enable us to emotionally relive an experience. For example, we all like taking pictures. We all like looking at pictures. Like, why do we do that?
Remember.
We can't remember what we had seen or did, right? It enables us to relive emotionally the experience. When you look at weddings of a simcha, of a bar mitzvah, a wedding, it arouses the feelings you felt at the time. Kavyochel, if such a thing could be said, the warm feelings that God has for the Jewish people are aroused through acts that are called zikaron. And we know that many of these warm feelings that God has for the Jewish people revolve around events that are associated with the shofar, such as the Akedah. Right? We know there's a symbolism. The ram's horn alludes to the Akedah, the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice that Rabbi Eliezer was willing to make. We know that Matan Torah, the Jews accepting the Torah, is associated with the sound of the shofar. Now, in the case of God, there's something very interesting. That God's remembrance is not only of the past. God can recall the future too. You see, because we are limited, because we live in the present, and therefore we only can recall the past, we can't recall the future. From God's perspective, He can look back to the past and look ahead to the future. Both are equally vivid. And therefore, the warm feelings that God has for the Jewish people are not only rooted in the events that we call history, but they also are rooted in God's foreseeing the events that we would call future. And I think that the parents, if they are willing to admit to the fact that they daydream, can engage in the same thing too. In other words, as their children are still very, very young, they dream about their bar mitzvahs and their weddings and their graduations and so on and so forth. And there is a welling up of very strong emotion, which is a consequence of this type of remembrance, which is really not a remembrance of a past event, but more a remembrance of a future event. And in one of the prayers that we pray, really at every Yom Tov, in the Ya'aleh V'Yavo, this is what we pray. We pray that Ya'aleh V'Yavo, may it come before you, Zichroneinu, our remembrances, Zichron Avosenu, the remembrances of our forefathers, the Zichron Moshiach ben David Avdecha, the remembrance of Moshiach, the remembrance of Yerushalayim, and as a result, all these remembrances should arouse divine mercy today, that all the things that we need should be addressed. But this is the idea of a zikaron. A zikaron on the part of God is there are certain actions that we can do that are like opening the family albums, that they can arouse within God such a sense of goodwill, a good feeling, that there's an outpouring of divine mercy. And again, the shofar is a powerful instrument of that. So, says the Ramban, that this is a Yom Adin. This is Day of Judgment. Everything's on the line. That's serious business, Day of Judgment. Our lives, our health, our livelihood, our happiness, everything is on the line. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu in His kindness wants to help us out. So we established that Yom Adin should also be a Yom Zikaron. It should also be a day of remembrance. It should be a day that through the mitzvah of shofar, we create a Zichron Trua, we create a remembrance which is aroused by the shofar, which leads to an outpouring of divine mercy, and as a result we can be Zayich Abedin. So Yom HaZikaron and Yom Adin are not the same thing. As the Ramban says, there are two different things. Because Rosh Hashanah is the Yom Adin, and that in turn we know because it comes 10 days before Yom Kippur, but because it's a day of judgment, and Hashem wants us to win our judgment, therefore He established that Rosh Hashanah should also be a Yom HaZikaron. My conjecture is that number one, that is why Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Tov. Rosh Hashanah is not a Yom Tov because it's the Yom Adin. It's a Yom Tov because it's the Yom HaZikaron. In other words, if it was simply a day of judgment, to celebrate would not be an appropriate response. Like you're celebrating the fact that you're being judged, you're on trial, your life is on the line. That seems very bizarre. The reason it's a celebration is because it's the Yom HaZikaron. This is a day of happy memories. This is a day of cherished feelings. This is a day of very warm feelings that God has for the Jewish people. And that's the cause for celebration. But it's only a Yom HaZikaron for the Jewish people. It's not a Yom HaZikaron for the Ummah Sa'ilam. For the nations of the world, it's only a Yom Adin. And therefore, the Torah did not make it a Yom Tov for them. It's only a Yom Tov for Klal Yisrael because the nature of the Yom Tov is Yom HaZikaron. Okay, so it's the Day of Judgment. The question is, how do we respond to this? And another very basic idea about Rosh Hashanah is that we seem to be oblivious to the din aspect of it. Because we do not pray for forgiveness, we do not do tshuva for our averos. It seems that we are almost foolhardy and naive in how we speak to God on this day. In reality, the entire day is devoted to prayers for the advent of the Messianic age. If you look at the Shemona Esrei, this is really what all the prayers are about. All the prayers are about bringing about that great day in the end where all mankind will recognize God and they will serve Him and worship Him, which of course is the Yemos HaMashiach. And that seems a very strange thing to talk about in Rosh Hashanah. But when you think about it for a second, it's not strange at all. You see, we fall into the trap of losing the forest for the trees. Because we are given mitzvahs, Torah, Tayag mitzvahs, very, very detailed instructions, how to live and how to act and what to do and what to eat and what to say, and so on and so forth, what to read, what to think. And we begin to think of these things as ends in themselves. We don't see that the mitzvahs are really means to an end. And what is the end? Or the end is exactly this, that all mankind should come to acknowledge the Ribono Shel Olam. As we said many times from Ramban, in Parshas Hazinu, that when God created the world, He really created the world with the intention that the entire human race should serve God together. There was never an intention that there should be a division between various groups of human beings. There should be a chosen people, and by definition, groups that were not chosen. The intention was that all mankind should serve God. Mankind as a whole failed at various junctures. It failed in the Garden of Eden, failed at the flood, failed at the Tower of Babel, and then Plan B was activated. Plan B is that there's going to be a chosen people that is going to bring all mankind to virtue. Now there's a very, very beautiful interpretation that the Rabbi Avram, beno shel HaRambam, Rabbi Avram, the son of the Rambam, brings from his father on a verse in Parshas Shemos. Just before God gave the Torah, God tells the Jewish people, "Vatem tiyu li, you shall be for me, mamleches kohanim v'goy kadosh," a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So what is the meaning of this expression, mamleches kohanim, a kingdom of priests? What does that mean, to be a kingdom of priests? Rashi says, in that context, kahana means sarim. It means dignitaries. That's all it means. But Rabbi Avraham beno shel HaRambam brings from his father an amazing interpretation. A kohen is a go-between, is an intermediary. So, for example, when a Jew wishes to bring a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, the Yisrael doesn't perform the ritual himself. He hands it over to a kohen. The Jewish people as a whole are intermediaries. They're intermediaries between the nations of the world and God. We are a mamleches kehanim. Now we also have value, not only instrumental value, in that we bring all mankind to God, but we, through our actions, also give satisfaction to God. So in that sense, we are a goy kadosh too. We are a unique, holy nation. But that means the function of the Jewish people is twofold. We are mamleches kohanim and goy kadosh. We give satisfaction to God in that we are the intermediaries to bring all mankind to the truth. We give satisfaction to God through our personal virtue and sanctity. But in Rosh Hashanah, we are very conscious of this fact that the world was created not that we should serve God alone, rather that all mankind should come to serve God. And it's appropriate to think about that on the anniversary of creation, because on the anniversary of creation, which is Rosh Hashanah, we should reflect on what the purpose of creation was. And the purpose of creation was that all mankind should serve Him. And we see that for our role is to work towards that objective. Now, how do we achieve that? We don't achieve that by taking out full-page ads in the New York Times and proselytizing. That's not how we do it. The way we do it is by living as Jews, creating a model society. We will be an influence on all mankind. Now this is something that, when you think about, is an amazing thing. Imagine, for example, today there's a problem, healthcare. Delivering healthcare, the healthcare system is a big issue today. Now you have socialized medicine in England, which is one extreme. You have the system in the United States, which until recently was the opposite extreme in Canada, some type of a compromise. There are probably dozens of other systems throughout the world. None of them is perfect. Some of them are very expensive, some are less expensive, some are more efficient, some are less efficient. The ideal system has never been developed. But let's say there was some country, some far corner of the earth, that somehow was able to design a healthcare system that had every advantage. It was economical, it was efficient, it promoted longevity, preventative care, and so on and so forth. No waiting lines. I mean, it was just perfect. Perfect in every way. How long would it take for that plan to be replicated throughout the world? Very fast. And people would go and study it, and they would say, wow, these are good ideas. Let's implement them in our country, and it would work. If Klal Yisrael could create a society which is really, really rooted in Torah, and I'm not so naive to think that the religious parties in Israel exemplify this ideal. I'm talking about a society which is really rooted in Torah values. That would be such a utopian society that it would be a model for everybody. You wouldn't have to publicize it. People would come running to find out about it. And that's what it says in the book of Yeshaya. It says that when Mashiach comes, and v'haya b'achras hayamim, it'll be in the end of days, nachayim yiyah har beis Hashem b'rosh harim, that the house of God will be firmly planted on the mountains, v'noharu elav kol hagayim, all the nations will flow to it, to receive guidance and inspiration. Ki mitzion teitei Torah, v'dvar Hashem Yerushalayim, for from Zion the Torah will go forth, and the word of God from Jerusalem. I have to mention, whenever the pasuk comes to mind, I'm reminded, years ago when I first moved to Toronto, this is 17, 18 years ago, there was an elderly gentleman that came to some of my classes. And this person told me that he had been a young child when his parents took him to a lecture by Jabotinsky. And Jabotinsky was talking about the importance, this is in the 30s, of working towards the ideal of a Jewish state, and so on and so forth. He gave his lecture. And there was a question and answer period afterwards. People asked, so you'll have your state, then what? So Jabotinsky said, what do you mean, and then what? And then, and we're talking about a person who was not a religious person, but he understood that if Klal Yisrael would be successful in creating this utopian state, it would be the beacon of light for the entire world. It's going to be tough, because if we can't convince our own people of it, how are we going to convince the rest of the world of it? So therefore, at this point, we are bogged down in dealing with preliminaries. We are reaching out to our own fellow Jews and trying to build our own infrastructure in the hope that maybe someday we can fulfill our ultimate destiny of bringing truth to all mankind. But you can't work on everyone else until you've worked on the internal problems. And that's why it's so facetious when you read about movements that say it's very important that we should reach out to attract converts, and we should reach out to the intermediary, and so on and so forth. Movements which can't hold on to their own people, right, believe that they provide a viable alternative for the outsider. Now, how are you going to convince an outsider to join something if you can't convince the insiders to stay? People are jumping off the sides of the ship, and you're going to convince people to board the ship. Very preposterous. But in any case, this is the idea of Rosh Hashanah. The idea of Rosh Hashanah is it's the anniversary of creation, and we're mindful of the purpose of creation. And therefore, we pray to God that God should bring about that the world should achieve its purpose. And needless to say, we are ready to do our role, what we can do to bring that about. Obviously, living a life of mitzvahs and Torah goes a long way toward accomplishing that goal. But Rosh Hashanah is a day that we don't lose the forest for the trees. We focus on the overall objective, and we don't get bogged down in the detail. That comes later. That's Aseres Metzuvah. That's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we work on the details. But if you work on the general principle first, then the details tend to fall into place. And that's really the relationship of Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is the general scheme. Yom Kippur is my place within the scheme. But that's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. It's about our yearning that God bring about the utopia, which is really the objective of creation itself. That's what all our tefillas are about on Rosh Hashanah. Chazal tell us, and the psalm that we say during Elul, the David Hashem Ori, Chazal tell us that Hashem is Ori b'Rosh Hashanah, He is my light on Rosh Hashanah, v'yishiv Yom Kippurim, and my salvation on Yom Kippur. Meaning as follows, that Rosh Hashanah, being the beginning of the year, is a day for agenda setting. It's a day for setting and making plans for the entire year. What we need on Rosh Hashanah more than anything else is clarity. So God provides light. He provides clarity on Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur already is implementation. On the level of implementation, we need to be saved from all the obstacles in our path. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Yishi Yom Kippurim. He's my salvation on Yom Kippur. The special siyat d'shmai that we have in Yom Kippur is that God protects us from the things that can block our path. But Rosh Hashanah is the gift of clarity. So, if we're going to use Rosh Hashanah properly and really plan for the coming year, we have to do some serious thinking about ourselves, life, our purpose here. Obviously, we can tackle this from many angles. I'm going to choose one particular one. I don't think we'll get through even a quarter of it tonight. But I'd like to mention an interesting thing. In the Slichas that we say Erev Rosh Hashanah, there are 4 very, very long Slichas. This is if you say Nusach Ashkenaz. There are 4 very long Slichas which have a heading above them called Shalmonis. Now, if you look in a Slichas book, you'll see that every paragraph has this little title above it. Some of them are called Slicha, some are called Pizmain, some are called Shlishia, Shnia, Akeda. Now these are technical terms. A Shalmonis is a poem of 4-line stanzas without a repeating refrain. If it has a repeating refrain, it's called a Pizmain, where every paragraph ends with the same line. But if it does not have a repeating refrain, it's called a Shalmonis. So you have 4 of these in the Slichas Erev Rosh Hashanah. There are 4 such prayers which have 4-line stanzas and no repeating refrain. But of these 4 Shalmonis, they also have another interesting characteristic, which is not part of the definition of Shalmonis, which is that each of these stanzas begins and ends with the same word. So you have 4 slichos in which a word is repeated again and again and again and again. And these 4 words are emes, truth, chayim, life, shalom, peace, and Yerushalayim. So it would seem to me that this might be a good starting point. Whereas if these are the 4 words that are featured prominently in these prayers and repeated again and again and again and again, maybe the essence of Rosh Hashanah can be fit into these 4 words. Emes, Chaim, Shalom, Yerushalayim. Let's start with Emes first. Truth is a very, very hard concept to discuss. There is a famous philosophical question which is given many names. One of them is called the fact-value divide, which is this. When we talk about facts, it is dark outside, the grass is green, the sky is blue, the trees bear fruit, etc. So to say that such a statement is true is easily said. For the statement to be true, it means the statement corresponds to the external reality. There's a correspondence. That the proposition, the statement matches the observable reality. If I say the sky is blue, and I can look out the window and in fact see the sky is blue, I can say this statement is true. It corresponds to the facts out there. What does it mean when we say that a moral imperative is true? Firstly, it is true that a person ought to expresses gratitude to God. Or for a Jew, it is true that he ought to keep Shabbos. That's not a statement of fact, which seems to correspond to a reality. It's a value judgment. Well, in what sense are value judgments true? This is the so-called fact-value divide, or it's sometimes put, you can't derive an ought from an is. Because your observation of the world cannot generate moral imperatives. So in what sense are moral statements true? Well, some philosophers will tell you that really moral imperatives are nothing more than personal preferences. So when I say it is true that you ought to keep kosher, it's nothing more than saying it is true that I think you ought to keep kosher. Now that's a fact. Right? If I think you ought to keep kosher, that is a true fact. If someone could analyze my brain, they would discover that that thought is contained in my brain. It corresponds to the reality. But we all think that it means more than that. And the proof is, if I come to you and say, I think you should keep kosher, you would argue with me. Correct? Let's say you weren't keeping kosher. You would argue with me. Now, if the meaning of my sentence is nothing more than I think that you should keep kosher, how could you argue with me? Are you disputing that? Are you disputing the fact that I think it? How could you dispute that? And who would know better than me what I'm thinking?
Disputing whether you should think that.
That means that the definition of an ought statement is more than just, this is my opinion. If it was just my opinion, then it wouldn't be debatable. And there are attempts that have been made to get around this problem. Some of them are very complex, some of them are very sophisticated. But the simplest answer to the question is this, that what if there is a moral imperative that is so self-evidently true? In other words, the fact of reality being such and such, there is a self-evidently true ought that emerges. Then you could drive an ought from an is. In other words, let us assume that a person's understanding of the world would lead him to believe that his existence was absolutely necessary for the survival of the world. That if he would cease to exist, the world would cease to exist. And furthermore, he would come to realize that if he doesn't eat, he would cease to exist, and therefore the world would cease to exist. These are all facts. I mean, imaginary facts. Let's say you could be convinced of those facts. Then it would be a self-evident moral imperative that you ought to eat.
Yeah.
But it's not like the situation in which we find ourselves today, that most moral imperatives really don't make that much of a difference to the physical world in which we exist. They really only impact ourselves. So the question is, why should I not take drugs? Because my mind will be fried, and so what if my mind is fried? What difference does that make? And so on and so forth. In other words, if there are facts that you could ascertain, which would really express the idea that there were very, 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 very dire consequences, so you're not acting in a certain way, it would be axiomatic, self-evident you ought to act in that way. That's what a Jew believes. Because a Jew's understanding of the world, of God's role in the world, God's connection to the world, God's demands that things be done a certain way, create a self-evidently true moral imperative that one ought to follow the divine command.
wasn't there a time where a vast, huge quantity of mankind accepted that about the Ten Commandments?
Historically, might be. Might be. But in other words, it's not a problem of how you drive the ought from the is. In other words, there's a certain understanding of reality which makes the ought so self-evidently true that it's not a major leap from the is to the ought. That is the clarity, that is the emes that we try to achieve in Rosh Hashanah.
With the Shema, we say everyone says that. Like that's the fear of God or knowledge of God with all your heart, which means your mind. The Shema is that.
That's right, but
that's why we.
But that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve that level of clarity, where our understanding of the world compels us to understand that one ought to act in certain ways. And that's emes, that's truth. That's what it means for a moral proposition to be true. In other words, it is so evidently true and so rooted in the reality of existence that it is self-evidently so. One of the problems that we have, I think, in religious life is that we treat our religious obligations as preferences. Because we do these things simply because they make us feel good, we feel enriched, we enjoy the social group that it gives us entry to. That's not good enough. Because we really need to understand that our mitzvahs, our obligations, are obligatory in as much as that they are emes. And it has been pointed out very interestingly that there's an idea of Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim, acceptance of the yoke of heaven. So what does this mean, to accept the yoke of heaven? I once heard from Adam Chacham, said like this: a yoke is the wooden harness that connects the axe to the wagon, to harness its energy. Let's say you had no yoke, and you need to pull the wagon. What's the alternative? How might you hitch the axe to the wagon? You might take a rope and tie it around the axe's neck and let the axe pull the wagon that way. What would happen if the axe took one step forward?
Choke.
It would choke. So the yoke is the implement that enables the axe to harness its energy and avoid strangulation. Why do we want an Ol Malchus Shemayim? The Ol Malchus Shemayim enables us to live a life of Torah and mitzvahs without feeling a sense of strangulation, without feeling choked. Meaning, if a person observes mitzvahs because they are his preference, I enjoy it, it makes me happy, it makes me feel enriched, it makes me feel good. Again, I like the social contact, and so on and so forth. But then circumstances change. And he finds himself in a situation that they become inconvenient, they're difficult, etc. So at that point, well, he's not invested in it. You know, his family, his friends, everyone looks at him as a religious Jew. He's got a lot of explaining to do if he gives it up. And yet there's a lot of resentment. Because now it's not pleasant, it's inconvenient, it's difficult. Now, if you think that this is an uncommon experience, I'm going to point out it's extremely, extremely, extremely common. How often does it happen that a person goes to a Rav with a question, doesn't get the answer he wants, and protests? He goes to the Rav thinking that the Rav will give a dispensation, like the popes, and the Rav says, no, it's awesome. And the person argues, maybe this is a heter, and 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 this is a heter. Now that comes because if you look at halakha, you look at Jewish law as a minefield or an obstacle course that has to be navigated, so it begins to bother you because you see the halachas as being obstacles. If you saw them instead as the true path to a purposeful life, you go to the Rav, and the Rav will tell you, this is not halacha, that's halacha, that's how I want to live, that's how I want to act. So this is more common than not. Because again, I think most of us are guilty of this. Most of us look at our mitzvahs as things we do because they give us pleasure, they give us meaning. It's our preference. And accordingly, when it becomes difficult, we are resentful. By the way, one of the tests of this is our willingness to impose them on our children. Think about it for a second. In other words, let's say, for example, when it comes to ice cream, my favorite flavor is vanilla. Not chocolate, not strawberry, not pistachio, plain vanilla. I believe that's the best flavor. And my child, one day, comes with me to the ice cream store, and he orders chocolate. Am I going to argue with him? Am I going to tell him, are you crazy? Chocolate? No. No, it's the flavor. That's the flavor you have to use. I wouldn't argue with him. Why? Because I myself understand that vanilla is only a preference. That's my preference. His preference is chocolate. So, hey, let him enjoy whatever he wants. But if I am studying math with my son, my young boy, and I try to impress upon him that 1 + 1 is 2, and he says, no, 1 + 1 is 1, or 1 + 1 is 3. I'm not going to let him keep that mistaken impression. I'm not going to say, listen, whatever you want, shafala. If you enjoy it, so be it. Because that's a fact. It's not a preference. It's a fact. The fact is 1 + 1 is 2. If a person would want to live his life thinking that 1 + 1 is 3, or that 1 + 1 is 1, he's just wrong. He's insane. Even though there'd be advantages to it. If 1 + 1 was 1, you could keep piling on debt, and you'd never be worse off. Whatever you add, you still have the same answer. And if 1 + 1 was 3, you'd always have enough money to pay off your debt, because whatever you bring in would increase at a greater rate than actuality. But since 1 + 1 is only 2, that's why we're in the mess that we're in. But we have to face up to that fact. We can't use voodoo mathematics and solve the problem.
Unless you're in government.
Unless you're in government. Now the question is like this. As Jews, we impose our values on our children. And what is the single mitzvah, which is the prime example of this, is bris milah. We take an 8-day-old child, doesn't know any better, and we do this to him. And if you look at the literature of the groups that oppose bris milah, this is exactly what they're saying. It's an imposition. You're imposing your values on a child who can't protest, can't reason. Let him decide when he's an adult whether he wants to get a bris milah or not. But for us, that's ludicrous, because it's not that bris milah is a preference and therefore, okay, when you grow up you'll decide for yourself. It's the truth, it's a reality. This is the ideal. So how could I hold it back from my child? That's what emes is all about. And when we realize this, that God's expectations of us are not merely hopeful preferences, but they are emes, they are truths, that's the Kabbalah for Malchus Shemayim. That's the acceptance of the yoke. Right? That means there's no resentment. We don't resent having to breathe, because that's the reality. We don't resent having to eat. That's the reality. Why should I resent having to do mitzvahs? It's not something I choose. It's something which is real. It's a truth. The is generates the ought. And that's the first thing we have to think about in Rosh Hashanah. The idea of emes. That the clarity of Rosh Hashanah should enable us to see the truth and accept the truth. That the choices we make should not really be perceived as preferences, but should be perceived as arriving at truths which are compelling and which create obligations. The second idea of Rosh Hashanah is Chaim. Chaim, of course, is dispensed from Rosh Hashanah. Chaim is life. And what is life made of? Matter is made of atoms and molecules. What is life made of? Life is made of time. The component units of life are time. If a person wastes time, it's essentially suicide. The only difference is that suicide has greater finality, because you're throwing out all at once. Right? Wasting time, you're just killing it a bit at a time. But that's the difference only in quantity, not an essence.
That's the expression. Killing time.
Killing time. And we have to know that if God is giving us the gift of time, it has to be used. It has to be used. Now, it's an interesting thing. We have classic svarim of Musar that give us guidance in dealing with the various Yetzaharas that arise. And they're all good. All these svarim are good. Because the Yetzaharas have not gone stale. The same Yetzaharas that operated 1,000 years ago are still operating today. But the truth is we have new Yetzaharas. Things that were not foreseen by the authors of the classical Musar svarim. Today, you find that many, many people really are well-intentioned, well-meaning. Their inability to live good lives is really because of disorganization, inability to manage time, and so on and so forth. It's not because their heart is in the wrong place. It's not because there's an underlying religious issue. It's not a lack of Yiras Shamayim. It's not a lack of respect for God. It's simply that people are so confused, so torn, pulled in every direction, that they can't focus on what they need to do to live rich lives of connection to God. So we all need a little bit of a course in time management. Mm-hmm. Now the people that speak about time management say the following. Imagine a circle with a horizontal line from top to bottom and a vertical line across from right to left, dividing the circle into 4 quadrants. Above the horizontal line is important. Below the horizontal line is unimportant. So remember, so on top, important. Everything is important. Below the line, unimportant. Now you have the vertical line. To the left of the vertical line is urgent. To the right of the vertical line is not urgent. So if you start at the upper left-hand quadrant 1, you have things that are urgent and important. Right? They're urgent because they're to the left. They're important because they're above the line. Upper right-hand quadrant 2, are things that are important but not urgent. Lower left-hand corner, quadrant 3, are things that are urgent but not important. Quadrant 4 are things that are not important and not urgent. Okay, I think we all understand that we'd be very well off to eliminate quadrant 4 activities. And if there are things that are not important and not urgent, we probably shouldn't be doing them at all. Okay, pretty safe to say. What about things that are urgent but not important?
Yeah, what's an urgent, not important?
Sometimes
most things.
Someone told me a story, an amazing story. Listen to the story. I have a friend who we were in Kollel together in California, and the Kollel sent him on a recruiting mission to Lakewood to recruit some new members of the Kollel. And for many people, this was a life-changing decision. Imagine you pick yourself up from the East Coast and move to California. You know, it's a position, it's a stepping stone to other positions. You know, this is a major life decision. So he was speaking to someone about this issue that perhaps this person should contemplate making this big decision. And someone comes over and says, excuse me, I have to give him a very important message. So tells him, there's a sale on motor oil right, in such and such place, 78 cents a quart. When you think about that, it's urgent. It's not now, when? The sale is going to be over tomorrow. But like, how much motor oil, right, do you use? It's not even like gasoline. I mean, you use a few quarts a month, even if your car is burning oil. And you'll save a few cents. It's urgent. You have to do it now. But it's not important in the vast scheme of things. Okay, so we can discount that too. Above the line, things that are important. Most of us spend our lives in quadrant 1. We are dealing with things that are urgent and important. We are managing crises. in our businesses, in our family lives, we are putting out fires. There are things which we must do. They are very important. They have the power to undermine our businesses and our families, and they are urgent. And we have to. So, for example, spending time with our children. Not when it's a crisis. Just spending meaningful time talking to them, being engaged with them. It's very, very important. But it's not urgent. It doesn't have to be today. It can be tomorrow. It can be over the weekend, and so on and so forth. But we're so busy with quadrant 1 activities that we tend to defer the quadrant 2 activities. So the time management people say that the goal of time management is to shift from quadrant 1 to quadrant 2. With good planning, you can avoid the crises, so you can devote more time to things that are truly important, although they're not urgent. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm a rabbi. I give a lot of classes, a lot of lectures, which is true. Pretty true. Now, you have to learn a little bit to be able to lecture. So if you are not so organized, you are always in crisis mode. Okay, I have a class in 15 minutes, what am I going to talk about? And you're looking up things and you're researching things, and it's last minute, and maybe you run out of time and you haven't finished what you want to prepare, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, if you only could get out of that crisis mode, then you could begin to study, not for the purpose of preparation. You could study just for your own enlightenment, for your own enrichment. And then you would discover that you do have more to say and more to discuss. But because the study was not directed to a particular session, it's not urgent, but it's important. And ultimately, it would enable you to do your job better than you would have done it had you always been in that crisis mode. Life and time is very, very important. And I think that in Rosh Hashanah, if we're really setting an agenda for the rest of the year, I think we have to be thinking about how we are using our time. And a lot of that is related to organization and prioritization. I always point out that if time was infinite, we'd never have to make choices. We could do everything and spend 50 years doing one thing, and 50 years doing the next thing, and 50 years doing the next thing, and we'd always have more time to spare. But because life is finite and limited, we have to prioritize. And I once saw a very interesting thing in a book. A person said, people think that successful people never quit, and that's why they're successful. The reality is the exact opposite. Successful people are always quitting. They're always quitting doing the things that keep them from their goal. And that's a very important thing. Just because you have been doing something doesn't mean you should continue doing something. If it's a dead end and it's not getting you anywhere, stop. Try something new. Just to keep going, just to persevere for the sake of perseverance, is really wasting time and resources. And these are commodities which are given to us sparingly and aren't to be wasted. So in Rosh Hashanah, this is the day that life is being given to us, apportioned to us. We have to be very, very scrupulous how we use it. Okay, so we've touched on two of them, Emes and Chaim. But next week we'll talk about the other two, Shalom and Yerushalayim, and see how they fit into the schema of Rosh Hashanah.